Hey everybody, how's it going this week? Hopefully everybody is doing well. Let me switch this to dark mode really quick. So, looks like it's a little bit slow right now. I'm going to give everybody another minute or so to log in here. I don't know if it's another quiet week or everybody's getting bored, I guess. So this week we are going to continue to work on our superhero game and working on the ideation, for this game. And specifically this week we are going to get into systemic design. And so this week with our systemic design, we're going to really start to try to break down kind of the high-level overview of the entire game and all the gameplay features, and kind of like what all would go into the game. So this week's going to be a lot of kind of jumping in there and trying to figure out, what is the high-level stuff, what are the high-level features we need to do. And I kind of want to show you guys this week what systemic design is about. I've had a previous talk about it. If you have not seen that, please go back and watch it, because I think it really is important to sort of understand what systemic design is about. And we'll dive in here in a minute to kind of show you what we mean by that. But in general, it's really just about how do we organize our game design? How do we organize everything so that it's, everything in the end has to be designed. We know all these things have to go into a game, and by breaking it down and knowing that by system and subsystem by subsystem and all these kinds of things, all these things are going to go into your game. It helps us to not get stuck. It helps us to understand like what needs to go into our game. And so that's something that is kind of interesting, to try to understand, because it really does save your butt sometimes as a game designer. So let's start to dive right in. Let me just type a message here. Let's see. So again, this week is another continuation of the superhero game. And again, this is supposed to be something that we all designed together. So like in previous weeks, please jump in. This is both brainstorming, ideation, and today doing systemic breakdowns of gameplay features. So throw your ideas out. This is, again, a safe space, for everybody to talk about their ideas. And so don't be shy and don't be afraid to throw out stuff that you think would be a good idea or a bad idea or whatever. But today is going to be hopefully just a lot of me kind of breaking things down. And again, kind of showing you guys how I would approach kind of just my initial outline, for a game project. And then from an outline, I'll start to break down each subsection, a little deeper, one bit at a time. So again, hey everybody. Hi Audrey, Dylan, welcome. Hopefully this will start to dive in a little bit deeper into details for you guys that are kind of in that process of moving your ideas from, concept and ideation type phases, into, an actual game. So really quick, this week I spent about 5 or 10 minutes and I reorganized the document just a little bit. And so you can see from the outline here, hey Eli, how's it going? So I wanted to kind of show you guys how I just slightly reorganize things. It's, again, not great. I'm not trying to spend a lot of time on this particular document yet. This is what I would call a working document. This is not necessarily a document that I would give to my team. This is not necessarily a document that's there. This is a brainstorming document that's designed to kind of capture everything and be a little bit rough around the edges. And then at some point, I will take these ideas quite often and then reorganize them into a more cohesive, condensed, document that's going to be for the team to use and stuff. But when I'm working, my process that works for me is to kind of throw a lot of stuff at the wall, right? And just kind of see what sticks. And there'll be certain things where I'll put a lot of notes to myself of like, do I like this or not? What can go in here and what doesn't have to go in there. And so keep in mind there's no bad things here, but really this is about organizing it the best you can so that you can find things. But ultimately, in the end, you want to have a very organized document that allows your team to find the things that they want to find. But don't be afraid to kind of overly elaborate or put stuff in there that you're not sure about and stuff yet, because I generally would not show this to the rest of the team. This is just my process and what works for me. And everybody's a little bit different, but I just want you guys to kind of see what works for me. Hey, Luke, how's it going? Go ahead. What's your question? So, the documentation process here is one thing I'm teaching. This does not mean that it replaces rapid prototyping, iteration, and stuff. So there's a lot of ways when we say the fail fast mentality. So to me, actually, in my world, partially because of my experience and stuff, I fail fastest here because when things are in words, it's a lot easier just to kind of put ideas out there and kind of see what works. And in my mind, I can work out a lot of things in words and then, eventually go to graphics and then eventually go into building something in, say, Unreal or the game engine or however you're going to rapidly prototype stuff. So I will often get rid of bad ideas myself here faster than if I was to go try to implement it, right? And so that fail fast mentality, while that's really good and rapid prototyping is really good, for us as game designers, we don't always have the skill set or the game engine, the ability, the technologies, the art, or whatever it is to build something fully ourselves. And so if you are a jack of all trades, and if you're somebody that can program really fast or rapidly prototype in Unreal or Unity or something like that, then yes, absolutely. There's certain things that need to be touched and felt and stuff. And so this process doesn't necessarily mean that it should be replacing, again, the implementation side of the fail fast. But keep in mind that the idea of failing fast can vary a lot, when you're having to implement things, right? Because if I have to build art and I have to code stuff and put it in the game engine and build levels, you got to know what you're building first, right? And so you're going to be much more likely to fail when you just try to implement something versus knowing what you're going to implement. And so that's why, for me personally, it's a fine line balance, and I can't give you an exact answer of when do you stop here and when do you go build, right? And in a team environment, you're going to probably have team members who are going off and then testing ideas out. Whereas, often you're doing things here, but for today's purpose, we are really just trying to kind of teach how to write documentation. And really, to your point, and I think it's a good point to bring up, is that you'll see that, I tell people this all the time, like in the end, you have to have like 100% of everything kind of designed in a game. But what makes a really good game designer is somebody that knows when to work on what and when to work on it, right? And like how much to work on it. So I've used the analogy like stories. Like you could very easily go and spend months, and I've seen teams do this, they literally spend 2-3 months writing out a story, and then they have not implemented, and designed any gameplay. And so then like they screw themselves because the story it's an okay story, but it doesn't fit the gameplay, right? And so then you went too far down this one rabbit hole, you implemented too much, and so now you've kind of failed slowly, and then you realize that the story doesn't work, and now you just kind of wasted a fair amount of time. Not to say that the story has to be completely redone always, but you can have a lot of problems. So yes, so to your point, Luke, you're weeding out ideas and you can implement things a lot faster, I think. Like, for example, even in level design, I know a lot of people that will jump into just like, oh, I can just start drawing on a map, and like, somebody will say design a level, and you'll say, oh, okay, I'm just going to go and start drawing things on a map. But I'm like, well, what's in that level? Like what, in words, like what is there? What are my goals? What are my objectives? What's my story? What's my gameplay? Like all these kinds of things. And if you just go straight to drawing it out, you won't know what it is. It's like trying to build a house without a floor plan, right? You can just start like, or you start maybe, or I guess the better analogy would be that you'd start drawing the floor plan of a house, and then somebody goes like, well, who's going to live here, right? Is this for a family of 4? Is this for a single person? Like, how much is this house supposed to cost? And how big is the house? And you're like, I don't care. I'm just drawing out like a cool looking, floor plan. I've got 22 bedrooms, and I got 6 bathrooms, and I've got all these things, and it's going to be the coolest house ever. And then they're like, oh, by the way, you got to build that house for $10,000. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that's not going to work. So I guess I got to redesign the house. But you didn't understand, what the function of it was, the space was going to be, right? And so that's kind of what the words are trying to do. The words are trying to define the structure for what you're going to do before you jump into a slow diagramming process, and drawing process, and then ultimately implement it in a white box and in 3D. Each one of those steps gets slower and slower and slower. So you can argue that a white box is rapid prototyping, but if you don't know what that thing is, what are you even prototyping, right? So that's what this is all about. So, so Elena, in some cases, it really depends on game for game and even feature for feature, whether rapid prototyping in paper can work. And so in some games, absolutely, there is ways of rapid prototyping with paper prototypes. That's especially true in strategy games and some role-playing games, and, various mechanics can be paper prototyped, but I'll say that there's definitely a lot of mechanics that just can't be paper prototyped. And so you really have to kind of understand, what are you trying to achieve with your paper prototypes? And, is the paper prototype going to take you just as long to build as like white boxing it in Unreal or something? And if you're going to paper prototype, you still got to know what the prototype's going to be, right? What is the game? What's the experience? What's the universe? All these kinds of things. And so there's still a lot of design work, in both in the game systems and the world building side of things that need to be done, to really make this a great game. And also keep in mind, it's just the last note that this process I'm teaching you is kind of how to design in a vacuum. And so this is not a very idealized situation, meaning that in most teams, you are going to work in a team, not by yourself, right? So a team will design a game. A team will build and prototype the game together. A team will work together to do this. And so I'm kind of showing you how to do it yourself. And maybe if you're doing this at home by yourself, or if you're an indie or whatever, you might in some world design a game by yourself. But in reality, this is very much a team effort. And so another reason for starting really high level and kind of having generalizations of things, and then diving in deeper and deeper, is that you want buy-off from your team. You want your team to be helping you, and you might be breaking things into different parts, into different sections, so that, you might have 5 or 10 designers on your team, and you need to break that apart and kind of know like who's working on what, right? And you've got system designers and the level designers. There's a creative director up here, and there's other people involved. You might have a narrative team, and each one of those people have their jobs and roles and responsibilities to this design. And so again, I'm kind of showing you how to structurally do this. But keep in mind that in the real world, this is really a team effort, and us as game designers, we're only as good as our teams. And then our teams also need to be able to implement this stuff. So it's not even just about us and our design team, but it's about, does the engineering team, the programmers, does the artists, and all the other executives, even sales and marketing, whoever needs to be involved, are they bought in on your concept? Are they bought in on your thing? And so that's where I like to have, again, the pillars, which we talked about, and then having high level concepts of different types of features, but don't go and, for instance, like say a combat system, don't go spend a month designing like the most amazing, or what you think is the most amazing combat system in the whole world, and get every little detail down until that does that fit with the rest of the game? Does it fit with can the engineering team even do that? And does the executive team buy off on it and things? So a lot of this ideation of what the process of what we're going to go through today is about defining and understanding what's really important. And it's kind of skipping over things purposefully when they're not important right now, but just kind of knowing that they're there helps us ask a lot of questions and asks us a lot of questions about why. Why are we doing this? Why do we need that? Why should we do this? Why should we do that? Right? And we really need to be kind of asking ourselves and challenging ourselves as game designers about that all the time. So, Elena, let's see. So I mean, if I understand your question correctly, it's really taking a systemic approach to this design. So we first kind of, again, keep in mind, I've told people we're slamming through this at a kind of a crazy speed. Like we're, the amount, I mean, this is, I think we're in our part 7 right now. So we're 6 parts in. We're roughly 12 hours into the designing of this game right now. And, that's roughly a day or 2 of work, or a day and a half of work, for in a working professional environment, and really this would be something that might have taken weeks or even a month to get to, in the perfect world. So we are moving quicker than normal, and things are, things are progressing, quickly, but don't think this is like how fast we would normally in a perfect world do it. And so yes, we are trying to use a systemic approach and knowing that there's a lot of these things that need to be defined, but we also want to make sure that to not spend a lot of time overly defining things yet. It's really, we're still kind of in a visionary state, if that makes sense. All right. So diving in here. Hi, Megan. How are you? Yep. Jump in. As Megan well knows, the amount of content per second that I usually give out is a little bit intense sometimes. So hopefully everybody hang on, and I'll do my best today to also talk and type and think and tell you what I'm doing while I'm attempting to talk. And I'm finding that to be an interesting challenge that I've never had to do before. Usually I'm sitting here just typing and I'm thinking, and I'm not trying to articulate that out to somebody else as well. So apologize if I'm sometimes a little quiet as I'm thinking while I think while I talk, I think while I type. And so one of the reasons also that I recommend typing out ideas or writing them out even on paper, but I think typing is more efficient, is that the definition in the design of the act of putting things down on paper really helps you kind of solidify a lot of your ideas. And so if you just talk and just think through lots of things and your ideas can kind of go all over and stuff, it doesn't help me as much. I like to literally get it down on paper. When I see the words, like suddenly I'm like, ooh, that was a bad idea. Like, what was I thinking? In my head, it may sound great, but as soon as I like kind of see it and verbalize it and understand it there, it changes for me. So find that process that works for you. But again, putting things down on paper, good and or bad, and sometimes long or short, whatever is there will help you think through processes, right? All right. So for now, you'll see that I created a section here called the pillars. And you'll notice again that I'm using headings again here to reiterate, things, because I like to have headings on things so that they show up properly, in this sidebar, right? It helps me navigate, through things a lot easier. And so so you see that, in the last, I think it was 2 weeks, we spent figuring out the core pillars of the game. We came up with, superheroes, teams, technology, massive battles, and bases. And, these are not 100% fully locked down yet, but we have kind of the high-level overview of where we think we're going. We talked about we need a couple supporting pillar or a couple supporting, details, features for each pillar. Usually that's, usually 3 to 5 pillars with usually 3 to 5 supporting things underneath is typical average. But again, everybody, there's no rule here, but this is my general rule of if I get more than that, I'm getting too complicated. So I use that as a way to stop myself and question myself that if if there's more than 3 to 5 pillars and more than 3 to 5 statements underneath, then I probably overly complicated the design. So in here we have kind of these high level. So up here we have the high level summaries of each one. And then what I did was, I kept the individual sections which are very, 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 very rough. They were kind of brainstorming and things like that. So I put the sections, up here for the pillars to have, the teams, the technologies, massive battles, and bases up here. Now, you don't have to organize it this way. This is just what I did because the pillars to me are the most important part right now of this game and this process. And again, in a normal process, I would probably work on these pillars a little bit more, and define these a little bit better. But for now, we are going to move ahead because I'm trying to kind of move this along, as an overall thing, because I'd like to try to get to a point within a few weeks that I may want to start talking about some other things and, move on from this idea. So I don't want to bore you guys, too long. So we'll see how many more weeks we go with this. But the plan would be to kind of just give you guys at least a good idea of how to get this started and kind of go from there. Now, for those of you that have never looked at a game design document or, a pitch deck or something like that, one handy technique that you can use is to go out and find examples of those. Now, if you're taking my course and you're one of my students, I give a lot of documents, this one included, that you can use as an example. But I also tell people these are templates, right? So even though this may be for another game, if you can go out and find online a game design document or pitch decks or whatever that is from other existing real products from other companies or myself or whoever you can get them from, not only do those give you an idea of like how much depth and stuff to go into, but as you start to go into a game design, you'll start to see that, okay, what are all these things that went into it, right? What are all these areas? And so it's a way for you to start asking yourself like, okay, how is this structured, right? Here's the different, gameplay, features, the game systems, the different worlds, the characters, cameras, abilities, controls, RPG systems, equipment, transportation, and various things. So you can see, and it gets into game structure or multiplayer. It's 60-something pages of very dense information. So, so this is a way that, again, if you're stuck and if you're not quite sure how to progress, if you're not quite sure what to do next, pull up a pitch deck, pull up a GDD, and then quite often you can just kind of see like, oh, okay, well there's, these are the different headings that I'm sort of needing, right? And so this will kind of just give you an idea of like what are the areas that you're trying to cover in your document. And so even myself, even with my own experience, will often, if I know that I have a game design that's kind of sort of similar, I will quite often pull up an old document and just kind of, again, use it as like a double check even for myself of like, did I forget anything? Like, because these things are massively complex, right? These things could be a 10-page document. They could easily be a 50-page document. And many go to 100, 200, 300 pages, and I've seen them as much as 500 pages. I'm not saying that that's how big you should make it. I'm just saying that every project, every team, every company, every publisher all have different requirements. And so, but, games can be really, really, really complex. And there can be a lot to them. And so the bigger the game, the bigger the team and things like that, more documentation might be needed. But again, these types of documents could be written over the course of a year, sometimes even two. So this is not like, even if you look at a 200-page document, it's not like me as a game designer, I sit down and go, let me write this, all up for you, and I'm just going to sit here for the next 2 weeks and crank out this 200-page, document. That's not the way we work. We work on little things. We go test things. We try things out. We talk to our team members. We get their buy-off on things. And then we write up some more. And then we test that some more and try that out some more. And then we write up some more, right? And so don't think that like me as a game designer or even as a game design team that we would sit down and write a big massive document just in one big poof, kind of thing. That's not going to get a great end result. It's a very iterative process. This is a very, very much a living document. And so, just be aware of that. That again, even a typical document like this one we're seeing here was months of work, and it's not that it necessarily took or would take that long to write 60 pages, but to write it well, to design it, and iterate on it can take a long time, right? So just kind of keep that in mind. And I mentioned it being a living document, so I've mentioned before that I do a lot of links and embedding and things like that. One of the reasons I also like, Google Documents and stuff is that, you can go in here and you can insert videos, you can insert links, you can insert, pictures, that kind of stuff. And so just like you saw kind of in this document, I try to use, as many pictures and other kinds of things as I can when I'm designing. And so it helps kind of break it up. It helps it make it look a little bit pretty. But this was not a living document, meaning it was not an online document. So it didn't have videos, didn't have that kind of stuff. And so I encourage you to be thinking about rich media content when you're designing as well. And if you have examples from other games or videos or whatever, use that material to try to minimize your words if you can, because that old adage of the picture's worth 1,000 words is definitely, very true here. All right. So, oops. Let us begin. So we had missions and characters in here from before, so I just kind of left them in. I put this heading in and kind of, again, reorganized the document a little bit today. I'm going to actually move this down here. So again, there is not a lot of right or wrongs here. This is about organizing things in a way that you like, and organized in a way that allows you to find things, and it allows, most importantly, for your team and other people working on this thing to be able to find stuff, as quickly as possible, right? And that's, again, why I use a lot of, table of contents and linking and embedding and, other kinds of things like that, right? To really allow people to find things as fast as possible. So, as we start to talk about, things like, for instance, characters, we had enemies and we had sidekicks, but we were kind of a little undetermined there. But we could have, NPCs, and so this might be, again, like heading 3. So, and right now this is not let's just say a definitive list, and so I don't care right now that if this thing's filled out fully, right? I'm just kind of trying to start to understand what things might be here, like bosses. Do we want to have bosses, right? We don't know yet, but I can put things in there and I can characterize it, So superheroes, and again, you'll see that I'm using stuff here so that I can understand, what types of characters are in here, right? And then you might want to have things like, and again, so like, for example, creatures. And so you can see, like, putting in, in fact, bosses here. Let's just use it more of a common nomenclature of that. So by putting in things that are kind of TBD, sidekicks were also, TBD, right? So, so by doing that, it kind of tells me that they're placeholder, right? These are things that may or may not ever be filled out, but I'm asking myself, is that thing that's going to be needed here? And then, stuff like story, right? And so, actually, let me put, So now creatures sometimes I put under characters, so it really depends on your game, and so it's not wrong to put creatures, there as well. So again, for organizational sake, you just have to decide at which point does something become an important enough feature for that. And then, you might have even things like like animals, and so I usually distinguish creatures as being something that would have more interaction with the players, meaning, they have combat or something that I'm fighting or things like that have a little bit more, versus an animal is something that's more, just a cow that's walking around, or things that might be there. The player may or may not be, interacting with them at all. So again, these are my definitions in the way I like to organize things, but just trying to kind of show you guys, like, just even under this heading of characters, right? Now, just to be clear as well, we do have the player character and superheroes up here. So this is kind of designed to be a little bit more of a high-level overview of them in relationship to the pillars. And so I am kind of duplicating this thing here. And at some point, this would turn into, just more of a summary overview related to the pillars. And these would be the buckets to where I'd start putting in more details, right? But again, these are just kind of showing how I'm starting to organize things, right? And so, So, again, these are, things where I'm going to think about, like, controls. So, these are things that, however you want to title it. But, actually, I'll just kind of put, call this game interface here. So again, these are all things, what I'm getting at here. Yeah, Megan. So critters or animals or whatever we want to call them. Again, systemics, like, for example, in some games you might call them minions, or in other things, they all, there's lots of different, names for, like, what these things, can be. So again, just kind of, it really depends on what does your game need. And again, we're not sure there yet, but there's stuff here that we know we need. There's stuff that we're questioning what we need, but we're just kind of, right now, I'm trying to show you how to be thinking about these things as systems, right? And so the interface for the game, we know that there's all these things, needed, right? And then each of these will be broken down into, various components. But it's giving us a framework again to work off of, right? And so so I generally start with kind of, one of the first questions is like, that general overview of, like, the game interface and things like that. And then, then I'll get into, like, so, like, gameplay. Let's just call this, like, core gameplay. And again, I may get some of this wrong. I'm just kind of, I'm working off the top of my head here, and this is as much brainstorming to as anything, right? And so, player movement. Let's see here. So, So player health systems. So what I'm starting to get here now is really the core of what the game is, right? What can the players, do, and stuff like that. So, and then, we have to think about kind of like what's the player do there. So, and in fact, here we could even put like, so that would be the right word, player, actually not player, but let's call this, just again, you can see that I jump around a lot when I'm doing this because I am trying to think about like what stuff is there, that I want to have. So character features, so, and again, these things may get moved, 100 more times. But as I'm just thinking through a particular area, sometimes my brain is taking me in different things. But what I'm doing logically in my mind right now is I'm thinking through, say, an RPG. And like, what do I do when I start the game, right? Like, okay, I've got to, I have to select, who I'm going to do, so, and then things like character upgrades, and then that makes me think about stuff like, like RPG features. So for me, I'll generally often put, RPG features or RPG mechanics, into a bucket. And so, again, these could be under core gameplay. They could be something else. Some of these things may overlap a little bit, but I'm trying to kind of get you guys just to kind of see how things are flowing, right? I'm not getting stuck on one thing, and I don't go like, oh God, I have to like think through all these things, right? And if you're not even sure, like if you have a game that you're working on, it's starting to, you're just kind of starting to sort of ask, these things. Now, one of the reasons, just if you're wondering, in this particular case, give you an idea of why these things are here versus why is this stuff not under the player character. And the reason being is that a lot of these game systems are generic, and so by putting them here, it means that these things are more broadly applicable to a wider subset of features or a wider subset of things. So, for example, classes and races, customization, upgrades, create a player, things all that long, all could be applied into bosses, could be applied into enemies, maybe, right? So these are generic systems that are there, to do things. So same thing with like character AI, and so again, like the reason I'll put those things into its own bucket is they may all, bosses and enemies and even sidekicks and creatures and like everything else, and especially if we're going to have, the team compositing, and things like that, we need to understand what are all these things, right? That drive that. So just like we were just about like teams. So like, we do have this up above, but I want to make sure there's a bucket for teams, right? And, there's going to be a better bucket for bases because those are the core, things that we're, again, looking at for our, stuff. Now, so then we can think about like, things like, so it made me think about, again, as I'm thinking about characters, I have gear and equipment, right? Now, that could be potentially here under characters, and again, I might decide to move this under, under it. There's not really a right or wrong answer here. It's just a matter of the more primary the feature is, the bigger it is, the more detailed it is. I may or may not give it its own stuff, right? But these are just ways of me thinking where I'm defining all these things that go into the game, right? And you can see that I'm not necessarily spending a lot of time detailing these out. This is not about like me sitting here now and I could spend the next hour just defining the character create a player system, right? That's not what today is about. That's not what your first pass is about. This is about defining all these categories, because it also kind of helps you sort of know like how big is this monster I'm creating, and and if it's too big, then you have to kind of start questioning like, do these things fit, right? Do these things work? And it just kind of helps you understand that stuff. And so again, I'm doing this off the top of my head right now, but I might also again be jumping back into a design document here, or even just looking at the table of contents, to remind myself of like, what do I need there, right? What do I need to have there? So thinking about stuff like, yeah. So like vehicles, right? So do we need to have vehicles and transportation? I don't know. But again, by putting the TBD there or marking it however you want, it just reminds me of like, oh, I got to think about that problem, right? I don't know right now, but there's the like, getting around a level, moving from mission to mission, all that kind of stuff, right? And things to kind of understand. Or like that makes me think about, here before bases, I might want to put, metagame, because the base is kind of part of the metagame. And so like, the metagame may be something that I need to have in here. Right. And, and then under missions, eventually I'll have, levels, and so just as I'm again thinking through these things, it's just really about like, what are these things, that we are going to need to have in here. And then, for example, types of levels, level mechanics, let's see. Level biomes. So these are the, the areas, the types of things that are going to go in there. What are the actual levels of the game here, so on and so forth, right? And so again, I'm just kind of stream of consciousness here, trying to define, these kinds of things, right? Same thing with like missions, so again, and the reason I'm thinking about these things is, and I'll put a note here, categories, right? So, and just use this as an example, like, so, so when I'm thinking about these, I'm thinking about these things in systems, not necessarily specifics, right? And so like when I'm thinking about missions right now, and how these all kind of relate, I'll constantly keep coming back to this, because the mechanics will ultimately often drive the missions, right? And so those are the kinds of things where I'll often be jumping around in a document, or often I have even the same document open in two windows and at different places in the document. And so it might inspire me as I'm typing out one thing, and then I go like, oh yeah, that would be a great type of mission. But again, I'm not thinking about a specific mission. I'm thinking about like, what are the categories in these things that can do it, that I need for these things, because all of these basically require a mechanic. All these things are something that, requires some system around it, some way of tracking the missions, and what are the things I would do as a superhero, right? Save someone, defend the location, and so just these are the kind of things that inspire you, and sometimes it's that chicken or the egg or cart before the horse kind of thing. Like sometimes it's actually good to think about what is the player going to do? What's the user story sometimes we call it, right? Like what are we doing in the game, right? And then does that thing resonate with us? And then if so, what are the mechanics around now work backwards, to go like, okay, now I need mechanics to fit like the types of missions, right? And does that make sense? Do I have the character's abilities and things like that? Kill someone, those kinds of things, right? And so these things all start to make sense to us, and then we can say like, so for instance, like let's say recover something, and then I'll go like, oh wait, that means I need objects. Right? And so I haven't done objects yet. And so I might come back up here, before characters, and I might say, objects, and then, it'd be the kind of thing where I'll say, so, object interactions, for example. And so you'll see again that I'm using lots of bullet points, and so, this might be, pick up, carry, buy, sell, destroy, whatever, right? And so as I'm thinking of things, and if I'm stuck right now, I'm like, move on, next, right? And then there's, so, and then I might have, different types of objects, or different ones that are exclusive to a particular person or something else, right? And so again, just kind of like, understanding there. And then, and then as I'm thinking about objects, I'm like, oh wait, now I need object management. Now this also is part of the game interface, right? But there's systems and mechanics around, object management, and, inventory systems, right? And then, I would say this should be types of object interactions, and then, and this might be interacting with objects, meaning, so again, related to the types of object interactions, but just, what are we doing there? So you can see how from a systemic point of view, like this whole little list, which is not complete, but this whole little list came about because I was down here and thought about the types of levels, I was under missions. And then, I was thinking about recovering something, right? And so now that just reminded me that I need, to have objects in my game, right? And so then I came back up here to objects. So, and then, bullet point these things down. Again, lots of indentations and sub-indentations because, again, systems, right? A system, is each one of these things, right? And you can dive deeper and deeper and deeper into it. But right now, I don't care about uber details, right? It's more about high-level stuff that's there. And now I might come back up to like core gameplay, like, player movement, so, walk, run, jump, right? And so again, these are just, again, quick ways of sort of, trying to understand what are the things that we want to have in here, right? And so this might be TBD, maybe that's something we know for sure we want, maybe it's not, right? And so then we might have things like here, Actually, I'm going to just say health because, again, and I'm even going to take this away and say just health systems because, again, a lot of these same mechanics can be reused for NPCs, can be reused for enemies, things like that. So you have to be kind of clear in understanding that a lot of these things should be, in the perfect world, again, very reusable systemic things that, again, would be applied to other stuff. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have a player health system and an enemy health system, right? They may work totally differently for some reason. But understanding what those are, at least starting off to try to reuse these things as much as we can, taking damage. Actually, that's really a different types of things. So some of these things, I'm detailing out just some stuff to kind of show you guys again how, let's see. And then this just made me think of like, okay, I need health systems, but now I need, we'll call them, for lack of a better definition right now, we'll call this superpowers, So again, I'm calling them, magic systems because magic is a more common way of kind of understanding these things. But again, like, and I'll use the word here, things just to let's see here. Let me put, before I forget, like, so just to give you an example of like, superpowers, right? So, these are what I call limiters, right? And things that would, that would kind of control you. So if I'm a superhero, right, do I have an unlimited amount of this thing? Can I just keep blasting my magic ability? I'm spraying fire, or I'm spraying ice or whatever. Can I do that? As long as I want, or does that drain a bar just like I would in a typical like fantasy RPG? Does it drain my mana, right? And then my mana, then I have to like drink a potion, or I have to or another player can heal me, or recover that, or does it slowly recharge over time? All these kinds of things. So magic systems are definitely and again, you could call it superpowers or whatever. In fact, maybe we will just to make it clear. But we'll call it magic systems there just to kind of, remind ourselves, because it is, for all intents and purposes. And in fact, even in this superhero world, we might have magic, so magic isn't totally ruled out in this world yet. But this is most akin to the design conceptually of a magic system if you were doing a fantasy RPG or something like that. And so conceptually, I want you guys to kind of see how that sort of works, right? And then, So, thank you, Megan. Yep. So like skills and abilities, is one type of thing. And then we might have, so this is a pretty big one. And for now we will put it into, under this, but really, for all intents and purposes, because combat is so big, I probably would put combat in its own section here. And then again, this is only for my own sake, because I know that combat can be such a big beast. It's a lot harder, but a lot of these core gameplay features are related to combat. So this is really just organization. Again, I may move things around a lot, in order to get things there, but I'm just kind of trying to show you guys, like, how am I outlining these things, and how am I just moving from one thing to another to another. And as I started to mention earlier, sometimes I can even pull up a game sometimes and just like start playing through it and going like, oh wait, yeah, there's items there, there's objects, in fact, I should even just say like items and objects. So again, these are all things that are kind of, big, and, as you can see, it can have lots of little sub categorizations, but it helps me just to be thinking through how this stuff, and you can see how in a very short period of time, we've already come up with, and we've been doing this for 30 minutes or something, and we've already outlined a fair amount of stuff, and it makes you like realize that there's a lot here, right? These games are massive. And again, I'm not trying to detail out every system, but I am letting myself go down these small rabbit holes when I start to think about like, okay, I've got a few things here I can define right now, right? And I've got some stuff that's there, and some of that I'm doing for the sake of you guys to understand things, but also just to kind of to show what it is. But like health systems is definitely could be more in the combat system, but not necessarily. So for example, so another area that's important to me here is now this could go potentially under levels. In fact, let's put it under levels. And so this would be things, and what made me think about this, and the reason why I'm separating out certain things, and I just want to kind of show you where my mind went there, is that I cannot spill. So so where they are, but the reason I'm putting this here is in a reference. So thank you, Elena. Yeah, this is so this could be things like yeah. So the reason I'm bringing these two up, and this could also be, I'll do one more, so the reason I'm bringing these up here is that there can be things in a world and in the game that are not considered combat, right? Meaning, if I walk out onto a planet and I start taking damage because I'm breathing poisonous air, or I get ejected out into hazardous space. Now, again, if I'm Superman or somebody, then sure, I can fly into space and I don't need to breathe, right? Breathing, isn't something I need to do. But if I'm Batman, I'm a normal person, and I need air to breathe. And, maybe Batman's got a little device for his little breathing thing underwater or whatever. But the point is that there can be things in a world that do damage. And that could be like a hazardous object, things that, and I'll even put things like, physics, can go a lot of different ways. The things that can fall on you, So the point of this and what I'm trying to show here and why I'm abstracting these things out is that all these things here, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 defined, and, there could be a lot more things here. These are all things that could damage the player, right? These are all things that could, do something. And the word damage is very broad. Again, thinking systemically here, these can be things that we should say really can affect the player, in some way, shape, or form. They could weaken the player, like kryptonite weakens Superman. It may not necessarily decrement his health bar. I don't know. I mean, in the Superman games, whatever, you could do both, right? But I'm just saying some of these things could be something that weakens a character versus, it could be something that takes away their magic abilities, their superpower, right? So when they're exposed in this environment, the effect could be that it's, hurting the player in that way. It could be affecting their health. It could be poisoning them, so it's damaging them slowly over time. So all these things are part of a level, but I would not call them combat, right? Combat is really, from my own thinking and logic and definition right now, is when it's my characters versus something else living in the world, and that would either be another NPC, an enemy, a creature, something along that lines would be what I would consider being in combat. And so these are two different states that both damage me, right? And so, or affect me, in some way, shape, or form. And so that's why when I'm defining this health system, why I'm defining it under a core gameplay heading versus under the player character or other things, right? Or under combat. So again, these are very, very, very arbitrary decisions. There is not a right or wrong here, guys, to be clear, right? There is a lot here that is really just for me. And again, I might move these things around, but this is for me and the logic of I try to reuse as much as possible. And I want things like health systems and stuff to be a generic system that affects everything and everyone in the game at some levels. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody needs armor or whatever, right? But there's something there, that has to deal with like health. It doesn't mean that NPCs have the ability to heal necessarily, right? But but we need to understand that, and then things like even the health system, death and dying, and then for now I'll put it here because it's kind of related to that, but really this could be a generic system like load save. I'll put that somewhere else later, but I'm just kind of trying to show that's there, and that all these things are, and I'll even say, because in a 4-player team-based system, we might have other things like where an AI teammate might get knocked unconscious, and then I have an ability or an item or something like that allows me to revive that person. So there's a lot of systems in here that we still are unsure of, but you can see how even just in a health system, there's a ton of things there, right? I mean, people just think health is like, oh yeah, it's easy. Like it's just, you take some damage, and and stuff, and how hard can that be, right? And so so again, these may not be all inclusive, but it's again brainstorming and making me think through, all these types of systems. All right, let me answer some questions here, guys. Thanks for chiming in. I appreciate it. So Luke, when working with a team during this process, how does one balance inclusion and a wide array of input for ideas and restricting new ideas for the sake of time management? So, tough question. I mean, I think, as a team, communication is really critical, right? And so you need to really kind of figure out what is the right process for your team. And so the team configuration, and who's on the team has a lot to do with this. And so in general, a creative director type or somebody might set a vision for a game, and so the high up guy is setting kind of a vision. And then let's just say you have a team of 4 systems designers, right? So then he might break apart like the game into say like, okay, you handle like the character systems, you handle the level systems, you handle the combat, you handle the exploration, and things like that. And actually that's part of this that I also want to put a sub thing here is just, now that I was thinking about it, again, this is the way, our brains kind of have to work. We're constantly, as we just think of ideas like, oh yeah, we need that, right? But so each area of a game can be, in theory, dedicated to, to that. So like, under RPG features, you could have, like narrative systems, for example, right? And so I'm calling out like key things that are common, that would often be like somebody's responsibility, right? And so typically then the process is everybody kind of divides and conquers. But again, you might have very high level vision for what you're going to do, and whether that takes you a day or a week or whatever it is, you're going to kind of come up with like, okay, here's the core system. Let me put together a very high level pitch for it, and then get back together with my team. And that could be every day, it could be every week, whatever works in the cadence for your particular team, to get the buy off with, your team. And that might, and then quite often you might be working in a pod structure. And so in a pod structure, you might be having your artists and engineers and stuff like assigned already to this thing, and you might even want to just get in a room and design these things together, versus you working in a vacuum. So it really depends on your team a lot, who's interested in what, and and stuff, and so these are not, it's not easy. It's just really about like what is going to get the job done, and how do you get buy off as quickly as possible on these things. But I really do recommend not really going for more than a few days to a week at the most, before you're checking back in with people and really getting their buy off on stuff, if that kind of makes sense. But it is a challenge. Yeah, so Luke, the can spiral into many what ifs, and that's where at some levels the creative director and whatever, that's why you start with the pillars, and you all agree kind of on the pillars, right? And then a lot of these features are things that are like, a lot of these are things that are, needed, right? Like you need to have movement, you need to have inventory, you need to have, conversation systems, that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of not what ifs, and then there is some secondary what ifs. But again, even just having a really quick overview like this. So imagine if you guys in your design team spent a few days or a week just fleshing this out, as a high level overview without any more detail than kind of like what I'm doing here, right? 1 or 2 levels of these kinds of things. And then, get together with your team and go like, okay, guys, here's what I'm sort of envisioning, for all the stuff that would go into like a combat system or whatever. What do you think, right? Or I might type out like a one paragraph or a couple sentences, of something just to kind of explain the vision for it. And that's where you can kind of start to kind of cut off a lot of the rabbit holes, that you're chasing like, well, should we go down this or do that, right? But in this early ideation kind of phase, it's okay to chase some of that stuff. So you do want to cut that stuff off. You do want to know like, what's working and what's not as quickly as possible. But you definitely want your team buy off on it, right? But you've also, it's a delicate balance of like, how do you make sure that people can have their ideas and chase ideas and explore ideas, but also, to a point where they don't go explore an idea for months, and then ultimately waste a lot of time, right? And so kind of skill and experience of being a designer will help kind of give you a little bit of like stuff there. And also the stuff that's more risky or innovative often is the stuff you need to focus on versus the like, how exactly is the player going to move right now? I may not care about, depending on, unless my engineers or my team is also going to implement these things sooner than later. And so another question for kind of what to work on and when and why and how is that we have two problems as game designers. In that we have two audiences we're trying to make happy. Our first audience is the consumer and the person that's going to buy the game, and we want to make a great game for them. But the second audience and such is our team, right? And so often we work in kind of backwards ways to define certain systems because if it's just a design team and a core leads team. That's the most ideal, and that could be 5 or 10 people or whatever that is on your particular team. You might be able to work a lot tighter and a lot better, initially to come up with all this ideation, and then eventually the team gets bigger, and then more people can come in and detail stuff out. But I've been on projects where literally I was handed 200 people, and said go, and you're like, go on what? Like, what are we even making? They're like, well, just get everybody to work, get them all working. And you're like, I need a couple weeks to like even figure out what this thing is, and the executives are already yelling at you to like get people designing right away. And so sometimes we're forced to say dive into enough detail on certain things that say an engineer could start implementing that thing right away, or an artist could start building some stuff or concepting and testing ideas and things. And that's where this whole process can get upside down pretty quickly if we're not careful. But sometimes again we get forced into this, and so we just have to find the best ways for that. So yes, Luke, to your point of every idea is okay right now, but you'll see that like I have this section for additional cool ideas, and so I will definitely keep moving things from the upper area down into this cool ideas area. And so it's really, really, really important to me that we never lose any ideas. But we also need to know, again, what ideas should be there. And that's why it comes back to two things. What is ultimately the pillars of the game. And basically, if there's any random ideas, if we've all agreed that these are our pillars, and if we all have all said that, and the executives and everybody have bought off on that these are our core pillars, then if, let's just take a random one to be like space combat. Like we want to have like suddenly, this really great thing where we can fly spaceships, and we can dogfight each other, and we can have like full 3D space combat, in space in these space fighters, right? And somebody comes up with that idea. And it's like, well, it's hard because we don't want to squash people's ideas, but at the same time, we have to ask what's right for the product, right? And so you have to ask yourself, is that the right thing for this game, right? And what are we trying to achieve with this idea? Is this idea furthering superheroes? But if I'm fighting and flying in a space fighter, like, this is not Wing Commander or some other, one of the million, space simulation games out there, right? This is a superhero RPG. So first you can kind of say like, hey dude, hey guys, it's a great idea. Like, it's kind of cool. And I could see where, again, I've got superheroes and space fighters. And so maybe there's something there, right? Maybe this falls under technology. maybe this technology thing, is something that ultimately, when we talk about having tanks and, and mechs and things like that, maybe that falls into this category here. So it's worth considering, right? And so we might go in there and say, is that a feature now that's worth putting into here? But what's that going to cost us, right? And in the end, it's not necessarily that ideas are bad, but they can defocus us. And so trying to limit those things sometimes is there, but then the same hand, we might kind of come back down to additional cool ideas here and just say like, So again, the point is that the idea is not lost, and it's something that can be, that we can revisit and we can put notes there and things like that. So it's good to be able to put any ideas into these things right now because we're still brainstorming. And we don't want to lose ideas because like that idea might fit. But again, like to design a really good space combat system, I also know through experience is really bloody hard. And takes a lot of work, and there's a lot to that. And, entire games are just built around just that, right? And so I don't want this game to get too out of control. And so you can temper the ideas, again, by coming back to what are our pillars, and does that fit within one of our pillars? So in that particular idea, maybe, but probably not, right? And so that's a way of eliminating certain ideas that are maybe not right for this document. But don't dissuade people from having ideas. And again, as a game designer, it's good to be challenged and take those ideas just because it's not yours. If a teammate comes up, even if he's an artist, an engineer, whoever he is, look at that idea. It's a team effort, right? And consider it and talk about it and understand like what do they like about it and really try to understand is it right for this product, right? But we have limited times and budgets and everything else, and not every idea can go into these things, right? We got to stay focused, and the pillars is what focuses us along with the core of what makes that genre of game, right? So like I talked about, the pillars are the new things, but there's that what makes the genre of game. And so, we need to have movement. We need to have combat. We need to have healing. We need to have stories, and conversation systems. Those things are not in the pillars, but they're core to the user experience of that genre. So those are things that we do need to have in there, right? And so anything else starts to become fat, and fat needs to be sometimes trimmed, if that makes sense. So Megan, yes. So in general, this document would be written by a game designer or multiple game designers, depending on who they are. It can be a combination of systems designers and level designers and level system designers, narrative designers, and a bunch of different ... types of designers, that are out there, right? But also, I would argue that this is a living document that artists and engineers and other people might be contributing to, or at least be reading at a minimum and things like that. But typically, the job, so to speak, of a systems designer is this. They're often the ones that are doing this. Now, again, a level designer might be involved here. A level designer ultimately might be designing the actual levels, but if you go back to levels here, and we were talking about this stuff, well, there's gameplay in levels and things like that. So level designers and system designers need to be collaborating on these things together, right? And so we need to, there's a wide variety of team members that can be involved in this process of the actual creation of this document, right? Yes, so yes, on a larger team, there could literally be dozens of systems designers, and if not even more, and there could be dozens of level designers, if not more. You get to a really big studio. You go look at Bungie, or go look at 343 doing Halo, or go look at some Ubisoft teams, and those teams are 1,000+ people, right? And, on a 1,000-person team, you could very easily have 100 game designers, of all different types on them. And you could have, a lot of those teams are a lot of artists. The art teams tend to be the really big teams, but, on a 1,000-person team, it would not be unreasonable to have 100 or 200 designers on a team like that. Have 500 or 600 artists, a couple hundred engineers, and a bunch of other people. That wouldn't be totally crazy. It's insanely big, but I'm just saying that, yes, on really large teams and the bigger teams, the more processes involved, the more of this documentation is done, and the more that work gets spread out, so the more specialized you get. And so therefore, then you're going to get like a combat designer, and you're going to get, a movements designer, and you might have a metagame designer, and you have the story guys and the narrative guys and the, all these kinds of things, right? The level designers, and all those different job roles start to become a lot more distinct the larger the team gets. So Megan, yes. So creative sessions in bigger groups need to be guided. Absolutely. And so that's something where you generally want to come in with I'm a big believer in having a creative lead on the team who's going to drive the vision, and whatever that job title is, whether you're an executive producer, creative director, project lead, or down to a lead designer, or however that works, is that there's it's a funnel, right? That there's a high level vision for what this game is, and then you're as we're doing now, we're starting to detail it out more and more and more and more, right, over time. And then each of those things gets put into their own little channels, right? So here's like combat, and it's doing the same thing. Combat's going down, and it's a subset. And then level designs, it's coming down and getting more detailed, right? And so in general, you would have brainstorming sessions or working sessions with a pod or group of people involved in the design of that particular feature. And again, that could include artists, could include engineers, could include sound guys, could include anybody on a team who's going to be at all involved in this feature set, right? And then, in general, it might be that, for example, we have a meeting just on movement, and the guy who's in charge of the movement systems is going to be very focused on, like, here's, this 1 hour meeting or whatever we're having is just to talk about flying and how are we going to make flying work, right? It doesn't even have to be we might have the first meeting about the whole movement system, and we might all agree that, like, okay, we're going to have walk and run and jump and fly and swim and, dive underwater, and here's our different things, right? And so we have a more vision meeting, and then we have the next meeting that might be like, okay, let's break this down and let's talk about this particular feature and how is it really going to work? How is it going to function? So, for example, like flying really needs to have the art team and engineering teams involved, because I've mentioned this before, in some of my talks, but like if you look at a game like Mercenaries, when I worked on that, going from on ground to like up high flying, be able to see like how your camera works when it's on the ground versus if I'm up high and I'm seeing there and I see a lot more of the world. And if I go from, say, being able to be like 100 meters up to being 1,000 meters up to being 10,000 meters up, the level of detail as I go up and up and up, really changes. The technology all changes. The art and how it's designed all changes. And so it's really, really, really challenging to come up with, stuff. So as a game designer, you can't just make a really arbitrary decision on something like that to say like, well, we're just going to be able to run on the ground or fly anywhere there. Like, I mean, that might be what you want to have, but you need to kind of go into the meeting and say like, here's my 5-minute quick pitch of the idea that I want to have. And then what do you guys think? Like, how is this going to affect the art team? How is this going to affect the engineering team? How does this affect the game engine? How are we going to build? Can we even do this, right? Can we accomplish this? And that's something that you have to really get your team bought in on, as a whole or whatever. But again, it has to start with a game vision and then go down to a smaller topic. And then somebody needs to drive that. And ultimately, somebody usually needs to make a final decision. That's generally the project lead or creative director. Somebody has to have final buy-off on all the details. But, they may not be involved in sort of designing that system per se or whatever, right? They may be they may be mile high or 10,000 foot high. Your job is to implement a feature. So you may be running that meeting and having it very focused and guided, with, potentially with a pitch deck or some kind of document or some visuals or whatever that is to get everybody on board to be able to show them what you want. You might have some videos and say like, hey, I was playing this game and I saw how they were, doing this and the ship was flying this way. And this is kind of what I was thinking. I like this and I like how it works, and show them, or even pull up the game and, on your Xbox and say, guys, like, check this out, touch it, feel it, see what you think here. This is kind of what I was thinking, something that I want to do. Right. And things. So you're guiding this, this thing, not just through text and words, but, also it can be through visuals or gameplay and stuff as well. So Big Lob, yes. I mean, this is a never-ending controversy of our industry is game design documents. Now, there is many schools of thought here, and I won't get into the whole debate of they're good or bad or right or wrong or not. But yes, the controversy is they very quickly get out of date, and for smaller teams, they can suffer through that and can kind of get through that things. But the larger the team, the bigger the team, the more problematic that becomes. And that's one of the reasons why I prefer like Google Documents versus other kinds of things, is that it generally is real time, and it's not like it. This was definitely a much bigger problem when we were using, say, Word documents that we would email around, and we'd have version 1, version 2, version 500 of the document, and somebody's still got version 200, and you're like, dude, that was like from 6 months ago, and like I changed everything. What do you, and they didn't know, and they didn't, know how to get to it. So as a living document, that's trying to tackle some of that problem that is systemic to the nature of game design documents in general. But as we move into COVID situations and work from home and things like that, we also get in the problem that we're not all in the room together anymore. I know a lot of teams that are not ever going to be back in the same office together. They've decided to be fully virtual now. But even that is like, how do we all know what to do? How do we know what to work on, right? And if we don't have documents, do we just have meeting? Like, what's the alternative, right? We can give people a lot of autonomy and just say like, okay, guys, I want a car that drives around in the world and does things. And literally, I know designers that's about as deep as they get. And they just literally hand it off to like some engineers and say, make me a car, and then the poor programmer's like, what do you mean? Like, what's the car need to do? And the designer's just like, go make a car. It doesn't matter, and there's like little thought, there's little there. And then the programmer goes and they implement the car, and the designer's like, what in the hell? That's not the kind of car I wanted. I wanted, a cool car that drives fast and has a lot of armor and has weapons. And, and then the programmer's like, but you didn't tell me that, and so communication breakdowns, whether it's verbal or whatever it is really tricky. And so for some teams, you can get over that through just great communication, being in the same room, or finding processes that allow you to divide and conquer a bunch of things and break it up. But again, even take that example of like a car. Like, if I don't know, a game is this very complicated machine, right? And then it's design. And so think of it like the old cog and wheel, right? So I've got this big wheel of the game design, and I've got all these little cogs, and I'm making one thing there, right? And so one designer might be just like, okay, well, I'm going to make the flying system, or I'm going to make the car or whatever. And they just they go off and design, and this is often one of the problems of agile development as well that can be problematic is somebody might just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to go design the car. So I go lock myself in my room. I'm at home now working from home. I'm just going to go design the whole car. I work on the car. I build the car. I test the car. I get it all working just right. I love the car. And then again, I show it to somebody and they're like, what were you thinking? Like, the car needs to be modular and have different weapons and, and have different configurations and have different, modular engines you put in it. And you're like, I didn't know that, right? So like, where does that information get stored? Where does that information, get saved? How do you keep it up to date, right? And so a really good designer will keep his documents up to date, But it is hard because as we get busier and busier and busier, sometimes, especially as we move from concept into implementation, then the updating of those documents starts to get rough around the edges, where it's just easier to be like, hey, George, can you do that? And like make that car faster, right? And then George goes and implements the car faster, and then another designer is just like, oh wait, George, I want the car to go a lot slower, and that's too fast for me, right? So I've got two designers potentially working on the same feature, telling the one poor guy who's implementing it to do different things, and he just kind of goes, okay, and I've seen that happen many times where they didn't update the documents and people are just verbalizing everything. People are not communicating really well, and then ultimately a lot of time and effort is wasted. And so this is a systemic problem that's not easily solvable. So I don't try to preach that any one solution is right or wrong. I think that there is a lot of inherent communication breakdowns in large teams and even small teams. But it is a little bit better if you got 5 people all sitting in the same room. And that's why the idea of like pods, meaning a structured small group that's working on a thing, again, could be great. But again, one pod could be working on this system, like let's just say vehicles over here, and this pod's working on combat. And if they're not communicating right, and if they're not documenting, then they could both like be working on systems, and they try to like merge them together, and then boom, they conflict, and they're like, what were you thinking? Like, the combat guy's like, I don't want cars that have combat in them. Like, I don't want weapons on my cars. I don't want to shoot from my cars. Like, what were you thinking? And the car guys are like, no, I thought that was cool. Like, I want to have, car combat, right? And, and again, communication breakdowns is what destroys our projects. And that's why, at some levels, why games are really, really, really hard to make. They're really complicated, and we end up redoing things a million times sometimes from lack of communication. And so, having more process, having more checks and balances that way, ultimately, if you work at a really big company, and I'm talking about, when I've been at EA, Microsoft, Ubisoft, and the big boys, they are much more process driven. They are much more about documentation. They are much more, about those kinds of things, because they've realized over time that heavy documentation and keeping that documentation up to date is actually a lifesaver, and something that, it's not an excuse to be lazy and just to say, oh, I was busy, I didn't have a chance to update it. It's like, no, you go update your documents and you make sure that everybody's on the same page. In the same way that, like, if you're an engineer or you're a programmer, do you just write code, or do you comment your code? Do you organize your code? Do you architect your code, right? And it's that same sort of idea, like, if you just sit down and just start writing code, and then, a few months later, everybody's like, what in the hell? Like, I don't know where anything is. I don't know, like, this system's over here, this is over here, that's over there, and there's values, and there's just stuff all over the place, and nothing's commented, and it's just this big spaghetti mess, which I've seen a million times that engineers do, and they're like, oh, I was too busy, right? I just had to get it done, and so I didn't stop to, like, clean it up, I didn't stop to comment it, I didn't stop to organize it, I didn't architect it, I just and wrote a bunch of stuff that worked in their head, but the whole team now can't use that, and it gets thrown out and redone, and sometimes when we're prototyping, that's okay. But again, design documents are that same systemic problem of, in some cases they're really good, in some cases they're bad, in some cases they slow you down, in some cases they keep you all on the same page. So again, I don't like to say that this is the only way. I don't like to say it. I am showing you guys today one way of working that works in some circumstances, right? And works for some teams, some projects, some types of games. We, in this particular case, are attempting to design a much bigger, much kind of scarier game, that's a lot bigger in scale. And so therefore, it needs a little bit more planning. It needs a little bit more, process in it, to really try to figure out kind of what is in the game, right? And so that's where, these things, start to, conflict. And so it's just important that you guys, again, understand that there's not rights or wrongs here, but the point is to get everybody on board kind of as quickly as possible, again, with the core vision for what the game is. and why is it fun? And again, we've seen that, we've spent now not even an hour, on this, and we've got, a fairly significant amount of, let's see, we went, just to give a sense of, 15 pages, not counting the pillar stuff that we worked on before. So we've done, roughly 10 pages of just outline today, right? In like an hour, and so this does not have to be a super long, drawn out process, right? This doesn't have to be something that takes weeks and months to do, but you can see how very quickly it helps us to start understanding some scope and scale, and then part of this sometimes is even the shock factor of like, oh crap, this thing is really big. Like this thing's scary big, right? And then, if you have, a producer type or somebody who's there helping manage schedules and your team and all that, people with experience are also going to start looking at this list and go like, oh crap, like that's way overboard. Like we can't do it, even half of that, right? We don't have the time. We don't have the budget, blah, blah, blah. It's not that ideas are always bad. It's just we often can't produce them in what we have. So by having these high level layouts of things there, it's kind of helping us to sort of start to define and understand what should go into the game, and therefore to start censoring ourselves on like, yeah, maybe we should find a simpler path. Maybe we should find a better path, right? But this is getting everybody, at least right now, this first, week or so of work that I would be putting into. If I was designing this on my own right now in a vacuum, I would spend maybe a week here where I'm just like outlining all these core systems and keep challenging myself, about what are all these things in the game, and then I can start asking myself the hard questions of like, why? Like, why do I need this? Why do I need this? Why do I need this? Right? And then kind of start to go like, maybe I don't, right? So hopefully that helps you guys and makes some sense, but I know this is not, it's not easy because again, there's not right or wrongs here, right? This is that there's just a lot of stuff there. Now, one of the problems with this particular game idea, and kind of one of the reasons I chose it, is that it's purposely a challenge. It's purposely something that's very challenging to make because it is a little bit of like a kitchen sink game. And by kitchen sink game, I mean it has a little bit of everything in it. The idea of superheroes and superpowers and all that kind of stuff can, in theory, go anywhere we want it to go, right? There is kind of like there's not a lot of limits right now on what we can and can't do. We have not defined what those limits are yet. And so we're still kind of trying to figure out what the universe is a little bit when it comes to the superheroes. We purposely kind of glazed over that at some levels. So again, this process of defining these core pillars and these things up here, I would have spent a lot more time kind of really figuring out those things, making sure they're a pillar. I would have spent, a day or two probably on each one of these features: teams, technologies, massive battles, bases, superheroes. So if I was designing this after I even kind of got this initial concept here for it, I probably would spend, maybe a day on superheroes, or probably even 2 or 3 days on superheroes because they're really core of what the game is. A day on teams, technology, all these kind of things. So this is like a week, maybe 2 of work to really get it right, to iterate on it, and then get buy off on it and get people, invest in it. And so then a lot of this will help inform all of these gameplay features, right? And so that's kind of, so right now there is some vagueness around that, but again, it's the chicken or the egg problem of there's not a right or wrong answer. I can back into a problem just as much as I can front end, into it. So, the same thing, I might say like, well, what do I think is kind of cool? So I could work on like, core gameplay, like what do I want the game to be? How do I want to touch it and feel it? And what's that experience? And what are those things that are there? And then I could go back to world building and kind of go like, okay, well, how does that fit my universe? How does that fit my superheroes and who these guys are, and those kinds of things, right? And so don't be afraid if you get stuck when you're world building. You don't want to world build too much and then try to go tack on gameplay, right? You want to do a little bit of world building, a little bit of gameplay, a little bit of world building, a little bit of gameplay, so on and so forth, and then getting buy off kind of along the way from your team, as you're going into these things. And that's where, again, if you get stuck, you shouldn't have a reason to get stuck. I find sometimes, again, people are, this can take them weeks, like to do, even this outline, like we just did in an hour. I've seen people spend weeks and weeks on this, and it's like, it doesn't need to be. Like, this is really logic. It's really common sense. This is really about, understanding what are the core components within a game, right? And understanding that there's all of these different systems that kind of go into a game, right? And then it's kind of like Lego bricks. And you're just like, oh, okay, here's my combat Lego, and here's my movement Lego, and here's my exploration Lego, and here's my items and objects, thing. And each one of those things just makes sense because you know that you have to have it in a game, and that knowledge is going to come from the fact that you've played a bunch of games, right? And you've broken down games, and you've designed games, or, you jump back over to here, and you're like, okay, what is it that I'm missing here, right? What am I, understanding, what am I needing to have, here, and so, I'll just find like an example of like, let's look for something here. Now this was a bounty hunting game, so it was a different thing, but like Teammates was a good example right here. So, is that under characters, or not? So, because there are certain systems that are going to be around that, but for now, let's put under characters. So, oops, I need to all cap it. So you can see how, like, even if I kind of got a little stuck and I'm like, yeah, what system do I need here? I don't know. Like, okay, now let me look here. Oh, Dead and Alive gameplay. Like, oh, capturing. Like, do the superheroes kill or not, right? And so then, you might then, that inspired me now to come back up to combat, and so I might have something here where it's like, what do you call it? And I can even, make notes to myself. So it's okay to like put notes in here, right, for yourself. And so I usually use an asterisk, before things when I'm making a note, there, and so, and then quite often I'll also put it like in italics or something just for myself. But again, kind of showing you like, as we're thinking through these things, we may get stuck sometimes. We're not sure where it is. And so now, that one little thing here of like, that reminded me of like, okay, Dead or Alive, like for a bounty hunting game made sense. But, if you think about like a lot of like superhero movies and things, they may or may not, the superhero movies may or may not, have a lot of like, especially like PG movies or whatever, like, look at like the Untouchables or whatever, right? Like, who's the core audience for this game? What this is asking me is, So you can see that, like, a lot of times I'm asking myself questions, right? And these questions may or may not be left in the document, and this is why, again, that's why I'm saying this is not a document that I would normally share with everybody. I might, for transparency, allow the whole team to have access to this, but I'm not like, hey guys, go read these 5,000 pages that I just wrote, right? This is really how I think. This is how how my brain for me works, and stuff. And so, but what that's, doing is it's asking me to ask myself questions. Like, do I want this, like, super violent, R-rated, movie, and if you think about, like, some of the Batman movies and stuff, they're pretty up there when it comes to the level of violence and people dying and, horrible deaths and some of that stuff, especially some of the later, the latest kind of Batman movies got pretty intense in the level of their fighting and, combat and things. And so I'll use that as, like, one spectrum of, like, more adult, right? And then you could go all the way down to, like, The Incredibles as a superhero, movie, and and that's at this other extreme of, like, very kid friendly, right? And how many movies have we watched? Like, I used to joke about. I doubt any of you guys even remember the show A-Team, but I'm trying to think of, like, a more recent TV show like that. But I just used to laugh because it was like this. It was just so corny and cheeseball, 80s TV show, and these guys are, like, supposed to be, like, hardcore special forces. And, and they're, like, the best of the best, and they grab their machine gun, and they're like, they just spray, and they miss everybody. And you're just like, you're laughing, because, like, nobody ever died in that entire show. And it was just, like, hilarious, and people are just diving out of the way, or they get knocked unconscious, or whatever. But I never saw anybody die in that show, right? And it became kind of this just kind of joke, but I still loved it. It was campy and corny and fun, but it was like, there's a certain point where, you don't have to have, total stormtrooper accuracy. And, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, in certain movies and certain shows, like, violence against humans and human versus human violence isn't necessarily a great thing, right? Now, that will often be overcome in movies like, if you look at Marvel, type movies or some of these superhero ones, they probably, and to be honest, I haven't analyzed this in depth, so I could be totally wrong here, but you're quite often not doing, like, the human superheroes are generally not killing and definitely not doing really bad things to other humans. Quite often they're, like, they're attacking aliens or giant robots or something like that, is where they're, like, their violence could be like, the Hulk is like, smash him, and he's just boom, 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 but he's crushing things that are inanimate objects that, you don't see Hulk run up to, like, just a normal human being and go, like, and just see the guy, like, Bambi style, just see the legs splat out there and blood fly everywhere, right? Like, that's not the level of violence that, a lot of superhero shows do. Most are PG-13 type, things, right? Batman, I think, being an exception that went a little bit darker, especially in The Dark Knight, Now, think Batman back in the original Batman, back in the 60s or whatever. That was definitely the campy A-Team kind of, like, oh my God, funny as hell, and corny as hell kind of Batman, right? Like, I mean, look at those as a good comparison of, like, even within the same IP, you can have two very, very, very different, takes on the same IP, right? One that's just fun and silly and totally, like, ridiculous, and then the other one's, like, hardcore, brutal, and, and stuff. And so combat is one of those areas that you have to stop yourself and think about these things philosophically. Do you want to do that, right? Do you want to, how far do you want to take this, right? And so you need to be very careful here. And this is again a philosophical point that I'm making in this one area, but really goes to affect the whole vision of the game. It really goes to affect all these kinds of things. And so this would be if this one point, if you were assigned to do the combat system, for example, and this one area had not been addressed yet, this would be an exact area of like, hey, Mr. Creative Director, Executive Producer, whoever you are, we need to sit down and all talk about this, because we need to all be on the same page, because I could go create a crazy combat system that's just insanely cool, but super violent and, not appropriate, right? For the brand, for the IP that we're trying to create. And because in this particular case, we're creating a new brand, it's important for you to understand who is the brand owner, right? The brand owner is probably the creative director, project director, whatever that title is. And you really need to validate some of these things with him. So even this one question right here, like this was the very first thing I thought about, in combat, I probably wouldn't move forward with this until I had a meeting, with that guy and ran it by him to kind of say like, what is our slant on this, right? So, if it's less than lethal or whatever, think about like, Spider-Man shoots his webs and, and captures people, or, things like that, right? There's a lot of powers and abilities and things like that can, be used in kind of less than lethal ways or in other ways that aren't as violent, right? Or more about capturing people, stunning them, knocking them out, and then later on they wake up in jail. Right? So maybe this is like, that kind of stuff, right? So, we need to understand this thing. This is a huge part of the philosophy of the product, right? And this will trickle down into a lot of different things. And even, at the high level, things we haven't talked about, like even what are the visuals for the game, right? What is the style of the game? Is this a Batman, Batman Begins, the latest, Batman movies, that are really dark, really gritty, even like the Joker movie, things like that, right? Those can be like pretty grimy places to be in, Suicide Squad, things like that, right? Pretty rough movies. Those are not something, you want to have a 5-year-old watch, right? Versus The Incredibles. And so that has to go through the theming, the story, the character designs, the combat, the way the world is put together, like all that stuff is philosophically all related. It's all united. It's all needs to be cohesive, right? And so if the vision holder for the product has not, come into that thing, then you need to like be able to sit down, with the vision holder or your team and everybody to make sure you guys are all kind of on the same page, right? And so, so keep that in mind that, when you're doing these things, that you can't work in a vacuum always, right? You might need to be able to have a kickoff meeting for a particular feature or a particular game or whatever, and make sure. That's another thing that that I'll often do is if especially something like combat or something. Sometimes it's good to have what we call a kickoff meeting, which would be just like, hey guys, we're about to start this thing. Let's all get in a room for an hour and let's brainstorm, or whatever. And in some cases it might be for a day. I've had even offsites where I will take the entire team, out of the office for 2-3 days, and we go to another place and we literally just sit down and we hammer through the initial vision for the game just to get everybody on the same page. And then once we've kind of got all this stuff kind of decided, then we can break it apart and say, okay, who's doing what? But we then know some of these hard questions about like the world building meets the game design, right? And that's why I tell people, like, you don't want to do a whole bunch of world building and then you try to do a bunch of game design, game systems, and then you try to slam them together and make them work, because again, do they fit? Are they appropriate? Like what is that world you're trying to build, right? And we may have the best intentions in mind, but again, they may not work together. So this is where communication is so critical, right? And this is where working as a team is so critical, right? Not working in a vacuum. So anyways, we're kind of out of time today. I hope that this idea of breaking things down, the systemic approach, again, makes sense to people. I hope you see the benefits to it, and understand that this is a a good way to keep yourself from, again, getting stuck, right? The idea of game design is to move to Luke's point, and you're welcome, Luke, that we need to fail fast, right? And so by the faster that we can work on these things and the faster that we can put things in there and then fail, that better it is. And so one last analogy would be like if you're writing a story, right? When you write a book, and this is maybe a topic for another day we should get into, but for example, when I write a story, and whether that is a technical novel like I've written, or whether it's a novel that's a sci-fi novel or whatever, it's the same philosophical problem, right? Of like, do you start like on page 1 of your story, right? Is the very, very first thing you do is you open up your word processor, you open up a new document, and you go, once upon a time in the wild, wild west, there was this mercenary bounty hunter, blah, blah, blah. And you start on page 1, paragraph 1, and you just start writing, right? And then you get like into page 3 and you're like, okay, now what? Okay, I got like one character defined, and like, where is this going to go? And now I'm stuck because I started at the beginning, I'm starting to work towards the end, and now I'm like got writer's block, right? And I'm like, I don't know what to do. And I've seen writers sit there for days trying to figure out what's next, right? Versus when I write a story, I outline the entire story. I know all the characters. I know all the key plot points. I know what roughly all the chapters are going to be. I know all these things broken down into kind of these systems again, into these key points. And so I don't have to start, thinking about that stuff, and then when I get to page 1, I kind of know where it needs to go. And if I get stuck on page 10 and I'm there for more than an hour or more for a time period, I jump to the next chapter and I'll go write something else for a while, and then I'm like, oh crap, that makes sense. Now let me go back to page 10 and keep writing there, right? Because things kind of come to you. So that's the same approach, right? And that you need to understand that breaking these things down, these systems, really helps you keep moving, right? It helps you to figure these things out quickly, because if you just get stuck on one thing and you bang your head against the wall on it for a week, you're not going to be, very happy. So Megan, especially, I'm talking to you right now. Stop, grinding on a problem. Start figuring it out, right? Like these are problems that, you've got to just sometimes put it down there and understand that these things all have to do and start answering the questions. But if you just get stuck on one problem for weeks and months, you're not going in a positive way, right? So that's where this systemic approach can help you fail much faster, if that makes sense. So anyways, thank you, Elena. I'm glad you appreciated this. And again, I hope this helped everybody out today. And I'll have to think about it if we're going to continue this next week. We'll see kind of where this is going. At some point we'll wrap this up and probably move on to some other topics and some other things. But I really want to make sure that you guys understand, how to design a game, right? From concept through finished, and not just talk about things conceptually. I want you to see how it's done, right? So hopefully this helps. Thanks again, Big Lob, and thanks everybody as usual for joining me. Be safe this week and have a great week, and we will see you all next week. So take care now. Bye.